All right, well, thanks for coming today. We're going to talk about lifecycle management and some things that we've been doing to get a better look at how to take a long-term view towards lifecycle management. First of all, I'm Stephen Rare. I'm with the Process Automation Division of ABB, and my job is to look at the service processes that we use to deliver service on our assets. And the goal is to try and get as much standardization and consistency on a global basis as possible. With me today is Eric Mulders. Eric actually just joined my team. Prior to that, he was working in the local organization in Belgium, and he did some early pioneering work with some of the lifecycle management tools that we're using, and really developed some of the first proofs of concept and integrated some things that turned out to be what we thought would be a good backbone for an offering that we could take to our customers and help them take a more strategic view to managing the life cycle of their equipment. So I'll explain kind of the strategy and where it fits, and then Eric will take us through a few of the examples and cases that he's worked on personally. A strategic approach to lifecycle management. What we found was that a lot of the things that we do to measure performance have to do with cost, response time, mean time to repair, things that I think of as lagging indicators. So you can look back and you say, how quickly was something done, how good was the corrective action? But it doesn't really look forward and try to take a predictive view towards any of these things. So what we were trying to do was maybe get out of the reactive mode and take a little bit long-term view towards managing automation assets. And the reason that's necessary, I think some of you will recognize this, our friends from ARC have been doing some research. This is a survey that was done in 2010, and they said that these plant pieces of equipment that make up a control system have a known life expectancy. The wiring is going to last somewhere around 35 years. The I/O panels, maybe 20. Controllers are good for maybe 20 years. Microsoft workstations or Dell workstations, 6, 7 years, kind of at the outside. Monitors maybe more like 5 years. And that's not really surprising, but what was surprising was that 75% of the users had systems that were more than 20 years old. And you can see that 20 years is kind of the end of life. And we all know that nobody's trying to replace these things. We're living with them as long as we can, and we're trying to extend them. If they're made to last 20 years, we're trying to figure out how to get 25 or 30 out of them. So that was really the inspiration, I think, behind some of the work we did was to try to start looking here at the beginning of the life cycle and plan for these things that are going to happen out here in the future. This is some work that we did ourselves. In fact, this all started last year right here at Automation and Power World. We had 60 customers come talk to us. We spent 3 afternoons talking to customers in focus groups, and we asked them about automation. How do you choose suppliers? How do you do service? What's important to you? Do you do it yourself? Do you rely on a business partner? How do you justify your investments? What things are the most important when you do some sort of automation improvement or some sort of modernization? What are the things that are most challenging? What are the things where you could use some help? You need to do it, so why aren't you doing it? And we got back some really interesting answers, and I'll share some of those with you. And by the way, after we did that, we took that same set of questions and we went globally with it to find out if this was a US response or if it was a global response. So we went in 7 languages to 15 countries around the world, developed countries as well as emerging economies. And what we found was amazingly consistent across the world. And so what I'm showing you here really represents a global view. And they said that the #1 reason that they do investments in automation and modernization specifically was obsolescence of the control systems. There was this resounding message that says, as long as the system works, we're not going to touch it, right? The only thing that's really going to drive us to make an investment in modernization is when we can't support it any longer, or when you, ABB, can't support it any longer. You kind of force us into a modernization cycle that we're trying to put that off as far as possible. So, we like to talk about all the reasons why you should buy a new system, right? Better performance, better flexibility, more control functionality, integration with SAP and enterprise systems, getting on the latest technology. It all sounds good, but at the end of the day, if it works, people aren't going to really spend a lot of money upgrading it. So if this is what drives modernization projects, what is it that causes those projects to be most difficult? Well, what we heard was the most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was the quality of the system. The most important thing to a customer was minimizing process disruption and downtime. That whatever you do, you can't stop my plant, especially in an unplanned fashion. So, we can give you a shutdown window, you got to come in and do all your work, but if it's not done when we're ready to start up the process, that's the biggest problem or the biggest risk that we see. But closely behind that was financial justification. There is no justification for replacing a control system in a lot of cases. And so that's really hard to try to figure that out. And so what we've spent a lot of time on is really looking at how do you plan the life cycle cost of a control system? How do you budget for that in advance? How do you get some visibility to that so that you may not want to do it, but at least you've got it planned, you've got data to back up the process and the decision making. You've got a business case that you can present to your management that says, look, here's why we need to do it, here's when we need to do it, and here's what we need to plan on spending. Loop diagrams, and we can talk about I/O, and we can talk about controller specs, and we can really tell you all about the technology. But when you do a technology refresh, you also have to look at the people, because there's a big investment in training, and there's a lot of learned behaviors, and to really get the most out of the investment, you have to sometimes look at your operators and your engineers. You also have to look at your process, and I don't mean the physical process, the paper machine, or the things that are going through the plumbing. You may want to look at those, but I'm thinking more about the work processes. How does information flow? How decisions get made? And so you really have to look at these three things together. And for those of you who haven't picked it up yet, I do have copies. ARC was gracious enough to bring us copies of this report that's called Managing Obsolete Technologies, Strategies and Practices. And this actually came after we started working on this presentation for today. And I opened it up and I started looking through it, and I said, wow, we got to take some of this information and use it in the discussion today, because it's saying the same thing. And what I'd like to think is that maybe we can offer an approach to deal with some of these things in a systematic way. What we did was we looked around and we took some best practices. We've talked to a lot of customers that have dealt with this and taken this long-term view towards automation. What we found was some customers are working with their suppliers in a different way. There's some that are very transactional, they know what they want and they buy it and they run the project. But there's others that are looking for some help along the way. So what we tried to do was to talk to the people that had done this successfully and to kind of document a flow chart that we could follow in the cases that have been successful. And what we came up with was that at the beginning of this, the supplier and the customer really need to talk about how they're going to work together and how they're going to do business. And if this is going to be a transactional relationship based on lowest cost and best technology, then let's ignore the rest of this and let's just talk about best cost and best technology. But if you're going to take a 15 to 20 to 30 year view about your automation assets, you need to have a partner that you can really talk openly about and do some planning with. So, the first thing is, do you have a common vision, and is there some appreciation for going through this type of analysis? Because it's not free. I mean, you have to go through some time and you have to do some diligence to make sure that you understand the assets you've got installed and all of the life expectancies of those. The next thing you need to do is you really need to find out if going through this process is going to generate any return on investment. So, if we do decide to take a strategic view, why would we do that? Well, there's a number of reasons you do it. Sometimes you can get at additional opportunities beyond the control system. Certainly the core of this is managing the life cycle of the equipment, but also in the process you get a chance to look at the other things. These are the business processes and the people-related things I talked about. Things like safety, asset performance, maintenance management, energy management, the skills and training of the people, IT security. So while you're doing the technology modernization, you also get a chance to look for some additional benefits that if I'm going to reorganize the way I do business, what can I do to generate a more positive outcome for my company? Then you start looking at a feasibility study that says, okay, how big are the potential gains? What am I likely to spend to get those? What are the priorities in that process? So, just kind of a back of the envelope return on investment that says, here's what I'm going to spend, here's what I'll get, and here's how long it's going to take to know whether or not you're really going to do the detailed engineering work to put this in place. And then you move to a business case where you really, do the detailed engineering. You do all your engineering specifications, you do your modernization plans, you do your implementation. You talk about what KPIs you're going to use to measure your success and track your performance. If you're going to be working with a supplier for 20 to 30 years, you're also going to talk about, who's going to be the interface for ABB, who's the customer points of contact, how often are they going to meet, What are they going to talk about? How are they going to make decisions? And I'll show you a little bit what that looks like. But at the end of that, you kind of wrap all of this up into a contract that looks, probably 3 to 5 years, maybe longer. Takes a long-term cash flow look at the business. And then you go through an implementation phase where you mobilize the resources and start putting the plan in motion. And there's some things that change when this happens. The first thing that you do is you start to get a handle on the life cycle cost of ownership, because you are looking at 20 or 30 years worth of life cycle cost. And you've got data to back that up. You've got support and justification for your evolution strategy, because you know where the capital investment points are in this 20 years. You have a chance to influence the production, the quality, and the flexibility of your manufacturing processes. You have a chance to influence the compliance and safety performance. You can influence the skills and competence of your people. You get very predictable costs and cash flows. You get a chance to put a governance process in place so that you can report value back to your investors, back to the people that finance your projects. You take a long-term look at managing those in a very proactive way. And the last thing is you can create some economies of scale so that you can achieve the lowest cost, because you are taking kind of an optimal look at when to do replacements and when to do refreshment. There's lots of good business that's done here as transactional partners, and it's based on efficiency, it's based on cost, it's based on technology. Usually these are fairly short-term kinds of things. You're working, with a purchase order, and you're looking out, a month, 2 months, a little bit of lead time. A lot of the things you're buying are commodities where there is no strategic impact, and so this is good business, and ABB does a lot of business in this sector. But we also talk about, what's after that? What's after you get the best price and the best performance, then what happens? Well, then you start talking about how can these services and products start to create a business outcome for you. So how can you get more production from your manufacturing processes? How can you get better availability? How can you achieve better quality? And that's where you start to really talk about advanced services, optimization, tuning, some of the things that might have an impact on the process itself. And there you start to look a little further into the future, maybe 1 year out, 2 years out. You start talking about value creation and return on investment. It's a little bit more of a tactical kind of approach. And you generally put some KPIs in place to measure how well you're doing. How much OEE improvement did I get, or what did my cost per tons do as a result of these improvement projects? And then here at the upper end, this is where you really start talking about a partnership. This is where you're looking 3 years, 10 years, way out into the future. You're trying to influence the business outcomes for the customer. So you're trying to help them achieve, get into new markets. You're helping them introduce new products. You're helping them plan for technology turnover, for skills shortages, some of the things that our customers really deal with on a long-term basis. You're also sharing some risk, right? Because we give you a price for what the future is going to cost. And so, we take some of that risk. We try to identify and manage those. And so, we don't just tell you what to buy and hope that it's right. We're partners, and we're in this together. And so, a good decision benefits both of us, and a bad decision hurts both of us. So we acknowledge that. But when you do that, you start to achieve a strategic impact. It also changes the way that people work together. In the traditional approach, I think a lot of people have seen versions of this, but in the traditional approach, we've got a purchasing team that's trying to buy something for their company at the best price and the best terms. We've got a sales department over here that's trying to sell you what you need at the best cost and make some money for ABB. And these people are working together in a very transactional way. In some cases, we've kind of turned this around, and we've put the customer organization, the end users, closer to the technical resources. And I'm hoping that a lot of the customers here this week are in this mode, because they do come to automation world, and they do have strategic alliances and purchasing agreements and master purchasing agreements, and they've worked out the terms and conditions, and they've got price lists, and so there's a lot of the friction has been reduced in how you do business, and you've put your users and the technical resources more into a closer working relationship. And what we're talking about is really going the next level, where we really put these ABB resources from the supplier and the customer's technical resources so close together that they're working as a single team. They have the same goals and objectives. They share the same operating plans. They each have view to each other's strategies, and they participate in developing those strategies. And they work together more in a relationship management kind of way as a long-term partnership. So that's kind of the setup for why we're doing this and how we're hoping to work together with our business partners. A lot of times, we look with our customers and we talk about, who are the speaking partners and how do we make sure that the right communications are happening at the right levels in the discussion. So there's a delivery team here that's working day to day against the work plans. They're very operationally focused. They're looking, 1 quarter out in the future, day to day, on how they get things done. Then maybe there's a steering team that's looking maybe 3 to 9 months out in the future, a little bit more initiative driven or program driven. And then there should be some sort of a visionary team or a strategic team that's looking at that, and they're looking at the business plans, and they're looking, what happens next year and 3 years and 5 years, and taking a longer term horizon. And so putting this in place and having the right discussions at the right level between the two companies is really important. But in general, there's enough positive things that happen here that we wanted to share some success with you and give you a kind of a view as to how we really do this. I mean, this all sounds good, but how would you really go about getting some data behind this? So I turn it over to Eric to show you what we've done in a case.
Turns out that lifecycle management is one of the important steps, one of the issues that a lot of customers face with. So that's why I give you some examples how we actually helped customers to improve their lifecycle management and to end up with a fairly detailed lifecycle plan. So first I want to show you some issues that are really important when you start developing such a plan. So first, the maintenance strategy. Basically, customers could have like 3 general maintenance strategies. And as the research Steve showed, is that a lot of customers have more like a break and fix mentality. So if you look in the time and if you look at your reliability and performance of your system, aging equipment, also the performance and reliability drops. So if you have a corrective maintenance strategy, something breaks down, you repair, and the system keeps running again, but the overall performance is dropping because of the aging equipment. If you would like to have a steady performance and that it stays on the same level, you could have like a preventive maintenance strategy. So you fix basically things before they break down. But while you're fixing equipment, you could also go for upgrades, and with these upgrades you can also make sure that the performance of your system improves. So that's where lifecycle planning really comes into place and where you get the really added value from this lifecycle planning, because in advance you know that you're going to move on with new technology, you're going to improve your production processes, and you're also flexible to change with market changes. So another important asset of this lifecycle management process is the total cost of ownership, because if you want to plan in the future, you also need to know, when do I need the budget? What kind of budgets do I need? So total cost of ownership is important. But as also the research showed, different products, different equipment, different life cycle. Each life cycle has also their own costs, their own problems. And total cost of ownership consists of your CAPEX, or your initial investments, and your operational costs. And in lifecycle management, especially those operational costs, they bring a lot of diversity which you have to handle. So how does ABB handle this? ABB has a lifecycle policy, which means that for each product, actual product but also software product, we define 4 stages of the product. So each stage gives you an idea what support you can expect from ABB, what are the costs involved. So for instance, active phase, the product is actively sold, actively developed, full support, full spare parts, everything. When it goes into a classic phase, and it only goes into a classic phase when there is a good replacement product already available on the market. Classic phase, there is no active development anymore in the product, but still there are updates, retrofits, and a lot of spares. Spares are actually sold, and you still have full support. When you go to a limited phase, the support drops, there is no updates anymore, and eventually the obsolete phase, where basically the support is on a best effort only. But as you can see, the minimum time between end of active and obsolete is at least 10 years. So that's the policy and the support you give for each product, hardware and software. So that's only for one product. If you look at just basic schematics of a control system, you already have lots of different systems. So each system has their own life cycle. So you already got like a puzzle of different products with different software versions. Each their different life cycle status. Each life cycle status has their own assets like price, availability of spare parts, maybe new replacement products, etc. So that's why it's really important to have all these details available and know what you're going to do with your lifecycle management plan. So the customer projects we did till now, basically the questions of the customer are quite general. They have often a mixture of ABB products. Those ABB products could be new, could be old. They could even have third-party products. You would like to maintain their productivity. They would like to have a long-term planning, no surprises, so they would like to have an insight in the costs involved. And sometimes, not always, they also would like to implement new technologies. And that was also one of the essence that came out of the report of ARC, is that if you're going to migrate, why not use this migration to implement those new technologies and to improve your production process? So it's a chance you just can use. We had some customers, and especially one particular customer had some issues, and he asked us, okay, ABB, could you give me as a total cost of ownership calculation or more a technology roadmap for the upcoming 15 years, and could you deliver that in 3 weeks? And we were like, okay, yeah, good question, but 3 weeks, let's first ask some questions. So first we would like to know what's the baseline? How do you deal with your process and your system right now? So what are the three areas? So the management, the technology, and the skills of your people. What's the baseline of that? So we're going to start it with a lifecycle index, we called. I'm going into more detail for each step later on. After that, if we acquire that baseline, we would like to know what's your architecture of your current system. What's the install base, what's the lifecycle status of your system right now. Then we would like to know, do you have any strategic plans in the future? What would you like to achieve with your plant right now? You're having this fairly old equipment. Would you like to keep it like that way? Would you like to improve it? What are your plans? Then we would like to set up a scenario, something where you can agree on, okay, this is something I would like to do for the coming 10, 15 years. And then we're going to calculate the costs that are involved. So we give you your total cost of ownership calculation. Then we would like to make a life cycle plan. In this life cycle plan, we're going to state all the outcomes of the previous steps, and we also agree how we're going to execute and how we're going to improve your system. And eventually the implementation itself, because a plan has no use if you put it in a drawer somewhere and not going to execute it. So let's make arrangements how to execute this. So this is how we develop the lifecycle management process. So this is the process we standardize, we have the tooling available, and this is how we deal with complex lifecycle management questions nowadays with our customers. So first step, the lifecycle index. The lifecycle index is a standardized approach to set up a baseline. So it's an objective measure where we have an indexation of the status of the system, looking at the management of the system, the technology status, but also the skill set of your people. So it's more like a basis of your first discussions. So first you need to know where you are before you can decide where you want to go. So that's what we do with the lifecycle index. Then after that, we know the baseline, we're going to look at the technology in depth. So what's the system architecture? What's your install base? What's the lifecycle status of all your equipment? Maybe there are some third party involved. What's the current as-is situation, but what would you like to be the future to-be situation of your technical part of your system? Maybe there are some risks we already know, maybe there are some changes in the system, maybe some lines you would like to close or to improve. So next step, until now we only had a in detail look at the technology itself. We also want to know what are your future plans. We want to make sure that the system to-be situation really applies the strategic plans you have in the future. So in this phase we only talk about functional needs and strategic future plans. And after that we make the translation towards, okay, which technologies do we need to make sure we follow the needs for the future. We also prioritize these needs, and we come up with technical additions to the current system as it is right now. So we have now the technical status as it is. We have the plans for the future, and we know what we need to add to the system to make sure we cover all the needs and the future plans. So now it's time to actually calculate what are the costs involved, what are the benefits gained, and what do we actually need to do to improve everything. So we do this total cost of ownership calculation, and here we take the install base. So we go till board level of the control system. We also take into account the new technologies we want to implement in the future. Yeah, this calculation could include, the initial investments or the CapEx. We also include, of course, the OpEx that could consist of maintenance, spare parts, service, engineering, project management. Really depends on in what amount of detail the customer would like to have his plan. We can change this calculation, but it's a good discussion. Okay, this is your scenario, this is the things we agreed on, and now you have a picture of what it's going to cost and what are the benefits. And sometimes you see, okay, I have some peaks here, and here I have some less investment, so maybe I can do some peak shaving, but then you at least know what will happen and what are the influences on your system when you do that. Basically, in this stage, we have an agreement on a possible scenario, on something we would like to achieve. Now we're going to make a plan. So in this plan, of course, an overview of what we've done until now, the outcomes, description of the future scenario where we would like to go, and really important, we're going to talk about the roles and responsibilities. Who's going to do what? What's our plan of implementation? Maybe there's some third-party involvement because customer doesn't have all the knowledge, ABB doesn't have all the knowledge, so maybe we also need third-party companies that could add knowledge so that we could execute this plan. The definition of the business case will be stated here in this plan. Then the actual implementation. Basically, the plan itself states the execution, but it's really important to now use the governance model, the model that Steve already showed you earlier, because you have to communicate here on different levels. On a operational level, you have to execute the projects that you defined in the plan before. These projects make sure that you execute and implement the new technologies and do also the migrations you planned. But each project has an outcome, and each outcome influences the plan you already made. So we have to constantly monitor if the plan is still valid and if you have to adjust it. So also on a higher level or more a management level, people have to align that we still cover the strategic needs and the strategic plans we talked about earlier here in the previous steps. And the ABB involvement here could be different, depends on the customer and the customer needs at that time. So we could do lots of the implementation, we could help with the implementation, so it can be a diversity, and it really depends on the in-house knowledge of the customer itself. So we could help them execute the projects, but we could also just do the training, but we could also help them with the definition and the engineering of the projects. So these are basically the steps in detail. Thank you for your time, and have a good rest of the day.